Jack wasn't a heavy sleeper, but this was ridiculous. Tap, tap, tap. Three distinct knocks, not loud, not aggressive, just soft and rhythmic, like the hesitant beat of someone unsure if they wanted to be heard. Tap, tap, tap. He blinked at the ceiling, still in bed, the dim streetlight outside his window painting streaks of orange across his cluttered apartment. He lived alone, worked freelance illustrating children's books, when his editor remembered to email him and kept odd hours. But even his messy life had its boundaries, and lately those boundaries were being gently assaulted by the ceiling above. He stared upward. It was coming from apartment 4B again. He groaned, rolled out of bed, and shoved his feet into mismatched slippers. The floorboards creaked as he shuffled toward the kitchen to grab his hoodie. As he zipped it up, he muttered, "I swear if it's some midnight TikTok dance." Jack climbed the stairs slowly, the old railing cool beneath his fingers. North 4 building was the kind of place renters described as charmingly haunted to justify the exposed pipes and eternally moody radiators. He hesitated outside 4B. The door was ajar. "That's weird." He gently knocked. Hello." No answer. He pushed the door open a little wider and saw her. She stood in the hallway barefoot, in a soft robe the color of ash, long hair loose around her shoulders. Her eyes were open, but they weren't seeing. Her hands resting loosely at her sides twitched once, as if remembering an action she hadn't performed yet. Mara. That was her name, right? He'd heard the landlord say it once. She'd moved in about a month ago, maybe less. He'd only caught glimpses of her mailbox elevator, always with an air of distance. Now she was in front of him, swaying gently like seaweed in sleep. Jack took a cautious step forward. "Hey, are you okay?" She blinked, her eyes focused, and suddenly she gasped, jerking back like she'd just woken up from drowning. I, her voice cracked. Jack raised his hands. "It's okay. You were sleepwalking, I think." Mara looked around her hallway, blinking. I was in bed." "Not anymore," Jack said gently. She glanced down at her bare feet. "Oh God, this is so... Honestly, it's not the weirdest thing that's happened to me at night," Jack said, then paused. "Actually, it might be, but I'm handling it okay." Mara let out a startled, breathy laugh. "I'm sorry, I didn't know I did that." He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious in his old hoodie. "Could have fooled me. You've got great rhythm." She looked at him. He backtracked. "I meant the knocking. You knock in threes every time." Her expression shifted, embarrassed. "Uh-oh." Silence crept in like fog. "I'm Jack," he offered from downstairs apartment 3B. "Mara," she said, already turning to go back inside. "Again, I'm sorry. I'll figure something out." And with that, she closed the door. Jack stood there for a second, listening to the soft click of the lock. Then he turned around, descended the stairs, and returned to his apartment. As he climbed back into bed, he whispered to the ceiling, "Sweet dreams, sleepwalker." The next day, Jack opened his door to find a mug of tea on the floor. Next to it was a folded note, "For waking me up kindly." He stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. The tea was still warm, jasmine maybe. He sipped it anyway. They didn't talk again until days later. Jack was heading out to grab his mail when he nearly collided with her at the front door. "Oh," Mara said, holding it open. He froze. "Hey, thank you for the tea. You drank it." "Of course. I'm brave like that." She smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure. You look like the kind of person who only drinks weird mushroom coffee." "Excuse you, I'm more of a two-day-old gas station espresso kind of guy." She actually laughed. It was short and she looked away quickly, but it was real. "I'm still sorry," she said, "about the knocking. I haven't sleepwalked since I was a kid." "It's all right. You weren't exactly summoning demons. Not that you know of." Jack grinned. "Fair. Just maybe aim for a different beat next time. Your triple tap is starting to feel like Morse code." Mara tilted her head. "What if I'm trying to send a message? Then I'll start sleeping with a walkie-talkie." Her smile softened. "Good night, Jack." He wanted to say something else, something clever or warm, or maybe even brave, but she was already gone. That night, she didn't knock, and he missed it more than he expected. Over the next week, he saw her twice, once on the front steps in the late afternoon reading a book she never seemed to actually turn the page on. Once in the laundry room, where they exchanged nods over the loud hum of dryers. There was something still about her, like a photo taken just before someone smiled, like the light was always just about to return to her. Jack started noticing the way she never looked at her phone, the way she always carried her keys in her left hand, like she was afraid to lose them, and the ring she wore on her right ring finger, simple gold, unmistakably worn. A widow. He'd overheard Mrs. Delaney say it once in the hallway. Terrible, really. Just 43, married nearly 20 years, cancer. Just moved in, poor thing. Jack had no reason to think about it as much as he did, but he found himself wondering what she dreamed about when she knocked, if she dreamed at all. The next knock came later. Tap, tap, tap. Jack sat up in bed, heart thumping a little faster than it should have. This time he didn't hesitate. He grabbed his hoodie, shoved his feet into those same slippers, and made his way up the stairs. The hallway was dim. Apartment 4B's door was slightly open again. He knocked gently. Mara. No answer. He peeked in, and there she was kneeling beside her living room window, head tilted as though listening to something distant. Mara, he said softly. She turned toward him slowly, like someone underwater. Jack, you're dreaming again. She blinked. I was just listening. To what? But she didn't answer. She stood, wavered slightly. He reached to steady her and felt the heat of her skin through her robe sleeve. She looked at his hand. You're always here. He felt his throat catch. Not always. Just when you knock. Mara looked at him a moment longer. Then in a voice more awake than dreaming, she whispered, I miss someone who never comes when I call. Jack didn't answer. She closed the door. Back in his own bed, Jack lay awake for hours. The building was quiet, too quiet. Somewhere above him, he imagined a woman dreaming of someone she couldn't call back, and he below listening for a knock that meant she was still trying, still reaching. The next morning, Jack opened his door and nearly tripped over a loaf of banana bread, still warm, wrapped in foil. Tucked underneath was another note. I don't know how to say thank you properly, so I bake. I hope you're not allergic to walnuts. Jack stood in the doorway for a long moment, grinning like a fool. He wasn't allergic. He was just curious, confused, compelled. And maybe he was starting to look forward to these moments in a way no one ever should. That evening, Jack brought the empty plate up to her door. He didn't knock. He wasn't sure he had to. It opened before he could raise his hand. I heard you, Mara said, smiling faintly. You have a very distinct way of walking, like someone trying not to wake a baby, but the baby already woke up and is judging you. He laughed. That's fair. She took the plate from him, brushing his fingers by accident, or maybe on purpose. Her hand was colder than he expected, her eyes warmer. You can come in, she said after a beat, if you want. Jack hesitated, but only for a moment. Her apartment was the mirror of his, but neater, no art clutter, no dishes in the sink. A single thick book on the coffee table with a pressed flower tucked inside its cover. Candles on the windowsill. No pictures on the walls. He noticed the subtle things, an Afghan folded so tightly it probably hadn't been used since she moved in a chair in the corner. No one sat in a clock that had stopped at 6:47. Tea, she offered, already moving toward the kitchen. I mean, you've already saved me with baked goods. Seems rude to say no. Mara poured the tea in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She handed him a mug and gestured toward the couch. They sat, two strangers, two mugs, one strange thread between them. I'm sorry about the other night, she said after a while. I don't remember everything, just fragments. Jack sipped. It's okay, it's not normal. I'm not exactly a poster child for normal either. My last freelance job was drawing a squirrel detective who fights crime with a magic acorn, so, she smiled. It's not just the sleepwalking, she said. It's everything. I feel like I'm floating through someone else's life, like I moved into this apartment, but my soul hasn't caught up. Jack turned toward her slightly. What was his name? She looked down into her tea. Elliot. He nodded. He used to sleepwalk, she said. That's the part that's so strange. It was his thing, not mine. Sometimes I'd find him in the kitchen talking to the toaster. Once he rearranged the spice rack alphabetically while dead asleep. Sounds efficient? He was annoying, she said softly with a smile that cracked just enough to show the ache underneath. Jack waited. He died, she said. Lymphoma. Quick. Not painless. Silence. I'm sorry, he said. I still forget sometimes. Not every day, just in flashes. I'll reach for a second cup when I make coffee, or I'll hear the floor creak and think he's home. Jack nodded, feeling something knot gently in his chest. I think I sleepwalk now because part of me is still looking for him, Mara whispered. He swallowed. Maybe that part of you just misses being found. That made her look up. Her eyes were glossy, not with tears, but with something older, something worn thin. She smiled. That's a dangerously poetic thing to say. I moonlight as a tragic romantic. Don't tell the Squirrel Detective fans. She laughed again, genuinely this time. Jack grinned. You should laugh more. That sounds like a line. It was a compliment disguised as a line. They sat there a little longer, sipping tea, letting the quiet stretch between them. Eventually Mara stood. It's late, Jack followed suit. I should let you sleep, or dream, or whatever version of rest your body prefers. At the door she paused. If I knock again, don't feel obligated to come up. He looked at her, the soft halo of hallway light catching the curve of her cheekbone. I don't come up because I have to. She tilted her head. I come up because I want to know how the dream ends, he said. She didn't respond. She just closed the door gently, but this time the lock didn't click. Jack didn't hear the knock for days, and in those days, he tried not to check the ceiling too often. He tried not to make tea and imagine she'd show up to return the favor. He tried to focus on his work on the latest manuscript. He'd been assigned a book about a whale who was allergic to salt water, but his sketches were distracted lines trailing where they shouldn't, shading too dark. She was starting to occupy the in-between moments of his life, the quiet ones, the lonely ones. Tap, tap, tap. He sat bolt upright. He threw on his hoodie and practically flew up the stairs. But when he got there, apartment 4B was wide open. Mara wasn't in the hallway. She was standing in the kitchen, turning slowly in place, her hands slightly outstretched. Mara, he called gently. She didn't respond. He stepped inside. The tile was cold under his feet. She looked like she was about to speak, but no words came out. Then slowly she turned to the empty space beside her and said, Are you cold? Jack froze. She reached out, still, dreaming still elsewhere. I can get another blanket. You always get cold first. Mara, he said softly but clearly. She turned to him like a ghost realizing she'd been seen. Her eyes widened, her lip trembled. I thought she started but stopped. He took one step closer. You were dreaming of him again. She nodded. Tears didn't fall, but her whole body said what they didn't. He didn't reach for her. He didn't touch her. He just said, Do you want me to stay a while? That broke her, not with a song, not with a collapse, but with a whispered yes. They sat on the floor of her kitchen, backs against the cabinet, 2 mugs of lukewarm tea between them. And Jack, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel like someone just passing through someone else's life. The next morning, Jack woke up with a crick in his neck and a memory of Mara's head gently resting on his shoulder sometime in the night. He hadn't meant to stay that long. He hadn't meant to want to. But the way she'd leaned into him, half asleep, half sorrow, it had rewired something in him like a clock that had been running just slightly off time until someone finally adjusted the hands. Now everything felt aligned or on the verge of it. By noon, he was back in his apartment, sketching. But he wasn't drawing squirrels or magical whales anymore. He was drawing her, not literally, no faces, no details, but the shapes, the posture, the stillness of someone holding too much grief in their ribs. And then on a second page, he drew a chair beside her. Just that. A second chair. He didn't know why it made his throat tighten. That night, Jack heard footsteps in the hall. Then a knock, not at his door, but faintly once on the wall between their units. He stared at it for a second, then smiled. She wasn't knocking in her sleep this time. He opened the door. Mara stood there in a cozy sweater, hair pulled back, a paper bag in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. I don't sleepwalk with alcohol in my system, she said. Or so I've been told. You hungry? I'm always hungry, Jack replied. Mostly for answers and lasagna. Good, I brought both. They ate on the floor again because Mara said the table still felt too married to her old life, too stiff, too formal, too not hers anymore. I should probably start making new memories, she said, poking at the garlic bread, ones where I don't cry into carbs. Jack took a dramatic bite of bread and said, Crying into carbs is a sacred tradition. She laughed. It was looser this time, braver. What about you, she asked. Why this place? You always been the downstairs neighbor who rescues sleepwalkers? Jack shrugged. I moved here because it was cheap and quiet. Plus, the building looked like it had stories. I like old things, I'm starting to realize. She teased. You're not old. You're not exactly my age, Jack. He blinked. She bit her lip. Sorry that came out weird. No, I just wasn't sure you were noticing me at all. She laughed nervously. Oh, I've noticed. Believe me. There was a silence after that, not heavy, but full like air about to shift. Jack spoke first. It's okay if you're not ready for anything. Mara leaned back on her palms. Do I seem like I'm running away? No, but maybe like you're afraid to walk forward. She tilted her head. That's fair. He nodded. I'm not here to fix anything, Mara. I just like being in the same room as you. She looked at him, soft, cautious, wondering. Why, she asked. He smiled. Because you make the silence feel different. Later, they stood at her door. No tea this time, no excuses, just a pause, a breath. Good night, she whispered. See you soon, she smiled. Let's hope not. But she didn't close the door for a long moment, and Jack didn't move. They both knew something had changed, not dramatically, just a few seconds of eye contact longer than usual enough to mark a shift. When the door did close, Jack stood there, heart knocking louder than any tap. That night, she didn't sleepwalk. He almost missed it. The next morning, he found a folded piece of paper slipped under his door. It wasn't a note exactly, more like a confession. I haven't laughed like that in a long time. I forgot how light I used to feel. You remind me of that girl, and maybe I want to be her again. No signature, no need. Jack had never asked about the second bedroom. He'd seen the closed door every time he visited Mara's apartment, always just slightly ajar, but never enough to see inside. Something about it felt sacred, untouched, not for him. But one rainy day, Mara asked, would you mind coming by? I could use your help with something. He brought over coffee and almond croissants, expecting her TV to be broken or a cabinet door to be sticking. Instead, she pointed toward the closed room. I want to open it, she said, her voice small but not alone. Jack froze. The rain ticked against the windows like a clock running out of time. You sure? He asked gently. She nodded, then added, I think so. They stood outside the door for a moment like it was a portal instead of a hinge. Mara's hand hovered near the knob. Elliot used to make music in there. It was his space. I haven't stepped foot inside since the day after the funeral. Jack didn't say anything. He waited steady, grounding her, like a weight at her side. She turned the knob. The door creaked open. The air inside was different, stiller, like grief had settled into the walls. Dust motes floated through the faint light filtering from the single-shaded window. The room was perfectly preserved. A guitar leaned against a chair, sheet music on a stand, headphones still coiled on the floor, an old record player frozen mid-play, a coffee mug on the shelf long since empty. Mara stepped inside. Jack followed slowly. I couldn't bring myself to clean it, she said. I think I was afraid if I touched anything, it would mean he wasn't coming back. Jack walked around the room with quiet reverence, fingers tracing the edge of a keyboard, the arm of the chair. He must have loved this space, he said. She nodded, arms crossed over her chest like she was holding herself together. He wrote a lullaby for me once, she said, laughing softly. Called it Mara in the Moonlight. It was terrible, sweet, but so off-key. Jack smiled. Do you still have it on cassette somewhere? She looked around, probably in that drawer. Jack moved to it, slowly opened it, revealing a tangled mess of tapes and faded labels. He found one marked in neat handwriting, Mara Moonlight. He held it up and she flinched like she hadn't expected to see it again. Can I? He asked, gesturing to the cassette player beside the shelf. She hesitated, then nodded. He inserted the tape, pressed play. Static crackled, then a warm voice filled the room. Rough, endearing. This one's for my Mara, who always looks like she's thinking of a secret no one else gets to know. Then came the music, clumsy chords, fingers missing beats, but full of adoration. A man loving his wife in the purest way he knew how. Mara's eyes shimmered. Halfway through, she sat down on the edge of the chair, clutching her sleeve. Jack stood beside her, but didn't touch her. The song ended in laughter. Elliot's laughter surprised at himself. You're going to make fun of me for this. Yeah, I know it. Click. Silence. Mara reached forward and stopped the tape. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I forgot his voice, she whispered. I didn't think that was possible. Jack crouched beside her and, you didn't forget, you just packed it away for a while. She looked at him, then truly looked. There was a shift in her eyes, grief, yes, but no longer strangling her. Something else was surfacing, something vulnerable present. I'm scared, she said, of forgetting him, but I'm also scared of staying frozen. Jack nodded. You don't have to pick one or the other. She smiled weakly. You say things like that like they're simple. They're not, but they're true. Mara turned toward him slightly. Do you think it's possible to love someone new and still love who you lost? He met her gaze. I think love doesn't erase. It expands. Her breath caught. Then she leaned forward slow, unsure, and he met her halfway. A kiss, soft, gentle, barely a whisper of lips. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't heat. It was two broken clocks briefly ticking in sync. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. I don't know what this is yet, she murmured. Jack closed his eyes. We don't have to know. We just have to feel it. Outside, the rain slowed to a hush. Inside, a tape rewound on its own. Later that night, Jack returned to his apartment, his heart buzzing with something like ache, but not painful. Hope, maybe, or something stitched close to it. He opened his sketch pad and drew the music room, but this time he drew Mara inside it, standing with the window open, light spilling in. And beside her, a new chair, this one occupied. Mara didn't sleepwalk that week. She didn't text Jack either. No knock at the door, no cassette tapes, no laughter over garlic bread on the floor. It was like she'd closed the door on the music room on that kiss on him. Jack tried not to take it personally. He told himself that grief wasn't linear, that people retreat before they return. But by the fourth day, the silence had teeth. On the fifth day, he finally went up. Just one knock, nothing. Then from inside, a quiet voice, I can't tonight. That was it. 3 words that hit harder than any goodbye. He stood there a moment, staring at the door as if it might change its mind. It didn't, so he left. And Mara cried on the other side. Inside her apartment, she sat curled on the couch, knees to her chest, guilt thick in her throat. The room smelled like the lemon soap Jack had accidentally left behind last time. His presence clung to everything now. The air, the quiet, the warm dent in her pillow from where he'd briefly rested his head. She clutched a framed photo of Elliot. Her late husband's smile stared back full of life. I kissed someone, she whispered to it. I kissed someone, and I liked it. The guilt surged, but underneath it, so did something else. Loneliness, need, want, the parts of herself she thought had died. Mara didn't sleep that night, not because of ghosts or music tapes or grief, but because of choice. If she reached out again, what would that mean? Would she be betraying in her past or finally claiming her future? Meanwhile, downstairs, Jack had pulled out his overnight bag. He stared at it for a long time before tossing in some clothes. Maybe a weekend away, clear his head, remind himself that she wasn't his to fix or to wait for. But then something stopped him. A knock, not on his door, on his window. What Jack walked over, confused, and saw Mara standing in the courtyard, below, hoodie on hands, shaking, shoeless. He opened the window. Mara, I didn't want to sleepwalk into your apartment again, she called up, so I came awake. He ran down in socks, heart thudding. When he opened the building's front door, she was still there, wet hair, wild eyes, like she'd run from a dream she couldn't shake. I'm sorry, she said, breathless. I panicked. I pulled away. I thought I wasn't allowed to feel what I'm feeling. But then I kept looking for you in every room, every hour. I kept hoping you'd knock instead. Jack said nothing. He just stepped outside and wrapped his arms around her tightly. She leaned into his chest and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding for weeks. I don't know how to be in this, she whispered. You don't have to know, he murmured back. You just have to want it. She pulled back, looked up at him. I do. Then she kissed him again, but this time it wasn't hesitant. It was full, deliberate, warm, like choosing sunlight after a season of rain. They spent the night in her apartment. No wine, no music, just 2 people tangled together on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, barely speaking. And when Mara began to drift off, Jack asked softly, Are you scared? She nodded. He kissed her temple. Me too, but I'm staying anyway. Mara stirred, reached for him. Not the door, not the music room, just him. Jack tightened his arms around her, and for the first time in what felt like years, Mara fell asleep not next to memory but beside possibility. It was a Sunday morning when Mara opened the music room one last time, not because she needed to, but because she chose to. Jack stood behind her, coffee in hand, quiet as always. He didn't speak, didn't press. He knew now that healing wasn't about grand gestures, it was about staying. Inside the room, the light had changed. It didn't feel frozen anymore. There was air moving again, windows cracked. The guitar was still there and the cassette player, but the grief they held had softened, faded into something gentler. Mara crossed the threshold and walked over to the shelf. She ran her fingers along the edge of the tapes, picked one up. Mara Moonlight smiled at it, then set it down. I used to think this was the only part of him I had left, she said softly. This room, this sound, these things. Jack stepped up beside her. And now I think he left me more than I realized. He left me the part of me that could still love. She turned to Jack. And I'm not going to waste that. Later that week, Mara made a decision. She packed away the music room, not erased it, not cleaned it out, but transformed it. The chair stayed, the record stayed, but she added a bookshelf, a new plant, and in the corner, a new chair where Jack often sat with a sketchbook in his lap, quietly observing the light. They didn't move in together, not yet. It wasn't about rushing. It was about staying, about being. One night, weeks later, Jack was sketching when Mara placed a small wrapped gift in front of him. What's this, he asked. Open it. Inside was a pocket-sized alarm clock, vintage brass trimmed, clearly well-loved. She'd found it in an antique shop. On the back, she'd engraved a message in small script. No more knocking. I'm already here. Jack stared at it for a long moment. He smiled so wide it hurt, then reached for her hand and pressed a kiss to her wrist. I think I love you, he said quietly. Mara didn't flinch. She didn't freeze. She smiled. I think I do too. That night, Mara stirred, but not from sleepwalking, from dreaming. She turned in bed and found Jack beside her, already awake, as if he'd been waiting for that moment. I didn't knock, she whispered. You didn't have to, he whispered back. And they fell asleep again, two hearts no longer haunted, but held. A year later, the music room had become something else entirely, still full of instruments, still full of sound, but now laughter echoed more than silence. They hosted dinners there, read poems. Jack hung his sketches on the wall. Mara played old records on Sunday mornings. One shelf remained untouched, Elliot's tapes. They were sacred, yes, but not sad. Jack sometimes heard her humming one of the melodies Elliot had written for her, and he never felt threatened. He felt honored, because love, real love, makes room for more than one. One of the most profound lessons from Jack and Mara's story is the transformative power of compassion and presence in healing grief. Mara's journey through loss teaches us that love doesn't end with death. It evolves, making room for new connections without erasing the past. Her sleepwalking, a manifestation of longing for her late husband Elliot, wasn't just a cry for help. It was a reminder that pain often seeks connection even in the quietest moments. Jack's choice to show up, not to fix her, but to simply be there, shows us that sometimes the greatest gift we can offer is our willingness to listen and stay. Their story reminds us that healing isn't linear. It's messy, full of steps forward and back, but it's possible when we allow ourselves to feel again. This resonates deeply in a world where we often rush past pain or hide it behind busyness. To love after loss, to be vulnerable after heartbreak, is an act of courage that expands the heart's capacity for joy. Let's cherish the people who show up for us and be that presence for others. What's a moment in your life where someone's kindness helped you heal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. If this touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss more stories that inspire and uplift. Together, let's build a community that celebrates the beauty of human connection.